Chapter 3. Up and down and out. By 1978, Apple was making money. The company grew quickly. Steve wanted our Apple products to run smoothly. But working with Steve was not easy. Small mistakes made him angry. Sometimes Steve yelled at his employees, even making them cry. And if he didn't get what he wanted, he often burst into tears himself. Employees tried to please Steve, but often Steve couldn't explain what he wanted. He simply said, "I will know it when I see it." In 1979, Apple started to make a new home computer that used a mouse. The company hired thousands of employees. Steve worked long hours, and he expected his employees to work hard too. He was so devoted to Apple that he didn't have time for anything else. His girlfriend, Kristen, had a daughter, Lisa, on May 17, 1978. Steve refused to have anything to do with his baby. He had no interest in a family. In 1980, Steve Jobs became the youngest person in history to make Fortune magazine's list of top Americans in business. He was 25 years old and he was a millionaire. Then, in 1981, something terrible happened. Woz private plane crashed. It took months for Woz to recuperate. He never returned to work for Apple full time. It was a big change for Steve. He and Woz had worked together so closely. Working with other engineers wasn't nearly as satisfying. Steve wasn't happy with the company's next computer. It was too big and too expensive. Nobody wanted to buy $10,000 for a computer. Steve had already set his sight on a new idea. It was a computer called the Macintosh. A Macintosh is a type of Apple. The Macintosh would change the world. Steve was sure of it. He handpicked a team of engineers to build it. They worked in a separate building. A pirate flag flew on top. "It's better to be a pirate than to join the Navy," he said. By this, he meant sometimes it was good to break rules and think in a different way. Steve broke all sorts of rules. He didn't like to wear shoes. He only ate fruit. He thought his diet made him so clean that he didn't need to bath so often. A lot of people didn't like to work with him because he smelled bad. Despite his strange ways, Steve could convince people to do things that seemed impossible. An Apple employee made up a name for Steve's power. He called it the Reality Distortion Field, RDF. Steve's RDF made people believe that anything Steve wanted was possible if they worked hard enough. One thing Steve really wanted was to hire a smart businessman at Apple. He thought the best person was John Sculley. Sculley was the head of the Pepsi-Cola company. He wasn't sure if he should go to Apple. So Steve asked him, "Do you want to sell sugared water for the rest of your life? Or do you want to come with me and change the world?" Here was Steve's RDF at work. Like many before him, Sculley ended up doing what Steve wanted. He came to work for Apple. In 1984, Steve introduced the Macintosh to the world. It was the computer for the rest of us, according to the ads. That meant it was not just for scientists and super brainy tech nerds. It was easy to use and friendly to look at. It incorporated everything Steve had learned about sleek design. It even used the knowledge of calligraphy he'd learned about back at Reed. When people typed on their Mac computers, he wanted the letters to be beautiful. He spent a lot of time choosing how much space would be in between letters. The Mac offered several different fonts or writing styles. Each one had slightly different letters. This made typing on the Mac fun. The Macintosh was far from perfect. It didn't have very much memory, and there was no way of adding one more. One man at Apple called it a Honda with a one gasoline gas tank. But in Steve's words, the Macintosh computer was insanely great. The first Macintosh commercial ran during the Super Bowl in 1984. By the end of the game, everyone wanted to know more about the Mac. The Mac sold amazingly well for a short time. Why wasn't it a giant hit? People were just not as interested in buying home computers as Steve had expected. And other customers who did want a home computer bought Apple computers. Many bought computers from IBM or Microsoft. John Scully was not happy at Apple. For him, the disappointing Macintosh sale were proof that Steve's ideas were wrong. Regular people would never need or want home computers. If Apple was to survive, Scully said it should make computers for business. They should make Apple computers that worked with products made by other computer companies. Steve hated that idea. He wanted customers to run Apple products on Apple computers. He didn't want outside programs anywhere near the Macintosh. Steve didn't like someone else telling him what to do. He had hired Scully hoping that the older man would teach him how to run a big company. After that, Steve expected Scully to hand the ring back to him. Instead, Scully wanted to make more changes. Every big company has a group of outside people that give advice to the company. This kind of group is called a board. A company's board can also hire and fire the head of the company. Steve tried to get Apple's board to fire Scully. That didn't happen. Instead, the board replaced Steve as head of the Macintosh. It was May 1985. Steve Jobs lost all the power he had at Apple. He was moved to a new office across the street from most of the other Apple buildings. He rarely saw other employees. Steve nicknamed his office Siberia, which is a remote part of Russia. It made him so unhappy, he started spending less time at work. In September of the year, Steve left Apple. What would Steve Jobs do next?
Steve Jobs' Apple was getting bigger, and Steve Jobs easily got angry by the small mistakes, and he got mad, and he can make cry the employee.
He make employees cry.
He make employees cry, and her girlfriend had the baby. But Steve Jobs wasn't important at family, and
Family wasn't
important to him, and he became a millionaire at 25, very young, most young age in the world. But later he bring the head of the Pepsi. And the head of the Pepsi said, John Scully said, and people didn't buy the home computer of the Apple. So John Scully said, you should stop making the home computer and make the working computer. But Steve Jobs didn't want. He said something to himself, so he didn't listen to him. But the Apple came more bad, and the board of the Apple decided to kick him out of the Apple. Steve Jobs made the Apple, but he was kicked out from Apple.
Good.